I'm Brian Custer, as a consultant with 3Cloud, and I'd like to bring today a series on Delta Lake. Delta Lake is essentially a technology that was developed by the same developers of Apache Spark, and was designed for is to bring ACID transactions and more to your data lake. So we've got a lot of challenges with data lakes. Specifically, they're typically very messy, and this is because everything gets dumped there. We don't have any rhyme or reason sometimes of dumping data. Sometimes we just dump data there because we think we might need it at some later date. There's other challenges and things associated with dumping, with deciding what to dump on your data lake. And so they're notoriously messy with lots of different files and file types. And the other problem too is that the files are notoriously very small and lots of them, and they're not compacted. And so trying to read them in any shape or form is very difficult, if not impossible. And then we also have situations where we have files that have been put on the data lake that for whatever reason, a failed experiment or a failed pipeline created a bad file. And so you have these corrupted data files, and so you can't really analyze it any further because they're corrupted. So you're going to have to go all the way back and kind of start over again to analyze that data. Well, Delta Lake comes in really to the rescue here. And what it does is it brings an open source storage layer that has ACID transactions, and it brings that to the Apache Spark big data workloads. So now what you have in place of the kind of the mess that I just described is you have a disciplined overlayer of your data lake from Delta Lake. And Delta Lake provides these ACID transactions through a log that is associated with each Delta table that's created in your data lake. And that log records all the history of everything that was ever done to that data table or to that data set. And so you can start to see how this would bring in very high levels of reliability and stability to your data lake by having a situation like this. Key features of a Delta Lake are ACID transactions, as I've just discussed, scalable metadata handling, unified batch and streaming, schema enforcement, time travel, or data versioning, upserts and deletes, and it's 100% compatible with Apache Spark. So these key features enable Apache Spark and Delta to bring ACID transactions to your data lake, as I just described a minute ago. And of course, we all know what ACID transactions are. We have them with typical relational stores like SQL Server and Oracle and other database systems. They bring atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability to your transaction. And with Delta, it's automatic. There's no, you don't have to write any code to actually formally commit a transaction or begin a transaction or anything like that. Essentially, when you start to write to a Delta table, it is recorded in the transaction log without any help from anybody. In other words, there's no code that has to be written to commit these transactions. They're committed automatically for you. And as I say, with Delta, it's completely automatic. So there's nothing you have to do to get these transactions written to the log in your for your Delta table. The transaction log, of course, is the key. Without it, we wouldn't have ACID transactions, and we wouldn't have some of these other features that I'm going to discuss about Delta Lake. So it's a very key piece of information for each Delta table that is developed and created in your path to doing ETL or what have you. The Delta transaction log is treated as a single source of truth, because it truly is. I mean, everything that you've done to this Delta table over time will get recorded in that transaction log, and it really does represent the truth of what happened to that table. Metadata handling. With metadata handling, too often it's been a real challenge to handle all the metadata that's associated with data. And with Delta, it throws the full force of Spark to handle your metadata. So you can have petabytes of metadata, and with terabytes or even petabytes or even more of regular, of your data, and it will handle this with ease. There's no problems with the metadata, handling the metadata. It's stored just like the data, and you can display it using a feature of the syntax called describe detail, and essentially it just describes the detail of what of all the metadata that's associated with the table. So what else can we say about metadata handling? Really the only other thing I can say is that it does put the full force of Spark against your metadata. And so you don't have any problems reading the metadata or understanding what the metadata is for a particular Delta table. For streaming and batch unification, what that really means is that there's no longer a need to have separate architectures for reading a stream of data versus a batch of data. With Delta, you can read a stream or a batch, either one, into the same table, and you can even do it concurrently. And it's all possible because of this transaction log that I've mentioned before. And so you can do these concurrent streaming writes and concurrent batch writes to your table, and it all gets logged, and it's all safe and sound in your Delta table. Delta overcomes limitations of streaming and batch systems primarily because it no longer requires that you have two separate architectures to handle both batch and streaming data. You just simply use the same Delta table as a source and sink. And you can set up a streaming system with just a few lines of code, and essentially, stream your data into your data set just as easily as batching it into your data set. So really, really powerful features there. With schema enforcement, this is what really makes Delta so strong in this space, because it really does enforce your schema. So if you put a schema on a table, a Delta table, and then you try to write data to that table that is not conformant with the schema, it's going to throw an error, and it's not going to let you write that data. So this prevents bad writes, and situations like that with your Delta table. So now there is a way to get around this to some degree, in the sense you can add columns. So you can have schema drift in that sense, where you add columns to your schema, but you have to set some properties on the Delta table to enable that. And so it's not right out of the box. You actually have to physically set some properties to allow merging of schemas, and then going ahead and doing the write without an exception. So the enforcement methodology essentially is that it reads the schema as part of the metadata, and it essentially looks at every column, every data type, and makes sure that what you're writing to the Delta table is the same stuff that the schema represents of your Delta table. So there's no worry about oops, I accidentally wrote some bad data to my Delta table. That's not going to happen because of the schema enforcement. Time travel. So time travel is a really big deal with Delta Lake. You can essentially query an older snapshot of your data. You can provide data versioning. So in other words, you can version your data simply by using the transaction log and going out and querying for a separate version or a different version of the table, and then putting that into another Delta table, for instance, and doing some work on it or what have you. Or you can roll everything back that you've done. Say you make some kind of mistake or something and you want to roll back. You can do that with Delta, And then you can also audit your data. So you can audit all your versions, and you can tell exactly what's happened to that Delta table all throughout history. And it's really comes in useful for when you need to audit your data trail and make sure that you're doing things appropriately. Upserts and deletes. So this is a big one because, you know, with big data, it's very hard to do these kinds of operations typically without something like Delta. And Delta allows you to do upsert or merges, as they say, and it allows you to do that very easily. And you can basically do a merge that's very similar to a SQL merge into your Delta table, and merge data from another data frame or what have you into your table and update it or upsert it. And you can also do updates and deletes with a predicate. So you can do a regular update or a delete of data with a predicate on a table, and that's just simply unheard of before Delta. You know, to try to do that in prior to Delta would be a very hard thing to do. And so this Delta allows you to accomplish this very easily. Okay, well, that's it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed this little talk on Delta, and I hope that you'll go out and read some more on it. Some great resources for training with Databricks, who is the main, I guess you could say the main proponent of Delta, is through the https academy.databricks.com/category/self-paced. That's where you can do a lot of Databricks training, including Delta training. And then there's a complete reference on Delta called docs.delta.io. And I encourage anyone that's curious about Delta to go to that reference and take a look. It's full of information about Delta. If there's any questions or anything about anything that I've talked about, you can certainly reach me at bcuster@3cloudsolutions.com. And you can ask me any question you would like, and I can point you to other resources and things like that. So it's been a joy talking with you guys today. I hope you've enjoyed this, and thanks for attending.